My name is Allison Parker, 32, sitting at the corner of a white linen table at Le Bernardin. My sister Rebecca shoots me that familiar condescending look across crystal glasses. Dad checks his Rolex impatiently, while Mom maintains her practiced neutral expression. They have no idea who I really am. 8 years of pretending to be a nobody while secretly leading major federal operations is about to end with one innocent comment from a restaurant trainee. Before I tell you how my entire family's jaws dropped simultaneously, take a second to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see their faces when they finally learn who I really am. Growing up as the middle child in the Parker family was like living in the permanent shadow of giants. Our New England home in Greenwich, Connecticut screamed old money and expectations, with its manicured lawns and colonial architecture that had graced architectural magazines. From the beginning, the script was clear. Parkers excelled, Parkers impressed, Parkers maintained appearances. My older sister Rebecca was the golden child from birth. With her perfect grades, perfect hair, and perfect planning, she sailed through Phillips Exeter Academy before collecting her education trifecta, undergrad at Princeton, MBA from Harvard, and now a corner office at Goldman Sachs by 35. Every Christmas card featured her latest achievement or exotic vacation, her smile as polished as her credentials. My younger brother Michael followed the family medical tradition, becoming the fourth generation of Parker physicians. Dad beamed whenever introducing my son, the neurosurgeon, at country club gatherings. Michael had the charm, the confidence, and the steady hands that made patients request him specifically at Massachusetts General Hospital. Then there was me, Allison Parker, the middle child who veered off script. Instead of an Ivy League acceptance letter, I chose State University for reasons my family could never comprehend. Such potential, wasted, Dad would sigh after too many glasses of scotch. Mom would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for not defending me more vocally. After graduation, I told them I'd accepted an administrative position with the government. At least it's stable, Mom had offered weekly while Dad scrolled through his phone, conversation apparently over. What they didn't know, what I deliberately kept from them, was that I had been recruited directly into the FBI Academy at Quantico. The background checks, the psychological evaluations, the physical training that left me exhausted but exhilarated, all of it happened while they thought I was shuffling papers at some forgettable agency. For 8 years now, I've built my career in the FBI's cybercrime division, specializing in cryptocurrency fraud and dark web operations. Last month, I led the team that brought down the RuseCoin network, a sophisticated fraud operation that had stolen over $300 million from retirement accounts across 12 countries. The Attorney General personally thanked me, though that part never made the public briefings for security reasons. Why keep my career secret from my family? 3 reasons. First, operational security. Many of my cases involved confidential informants and undercover work. The fewer people who knew the details of my position, the safer everyone remained. Second, my family's dismissive attitude toward law enforcement. Dad once called it a career for those who couldn't think of anything better to do. At a dinner party, I overheard him telling his friends that real ambition would never settle for a government salary. Third, and I'm not proud of this one, I enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about being underestimated. While they pitted my administrative assistant position, I was flying to Interpol headquarters in Lyon to coordinate international operations. While they assumed I was struggling financially, I was receiving performance bonuses that had helped me quietly purchase my apartment outright. Our annual family reunion dinner had become something of a performance for me. Once a year, we gathered at an upscale restaurant, and I would nod and smile through hours of condescension. Rebecca would talk about her latest promotion. Michael would casually mention the paper he published in a prestigious medical journal. Parents would beam. I would become increasingly invisible. This year's dinner at Lo Bernardine wasn't supposed to be any different. I'd planned to deflect questions about my job with vague comments about government work and office responsibilities. I'd nod appreciatively when Dad inevitably offered to help me find something more suitable. I'd endure Rebecca's not-so-subtle comparisons between my modest apartment and her Tribeca penthouse. What I hadn't planned on was running into Jake Miller, a key witness I had prepared for testimony in the ruse coin case. I certainly hadn't expected him to be working as a trainee at the exact restaurant where my family was determined to remind me of my inadequacies. Sometimes the universe has a wicked sense of humor. Lo Bernardine sparkled like a treasure chest that spring evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware, while suited staff glided between tables with practiced precision. The restaurant had 3 Michelin stars, a waitlist stretching months, and prices that made tourists gasp, exactly the type of place my family considered appropriate for our annual reunion. I arrived 15 minutes early. My FBI habit of punctuality impossible to break. The maitre d' greeted me with a practiced smile. "Reservation for Parker, 7:30, I said. Smoothing down my simple black dress, understated but quality, like most things in my wardrobe. "Of course, Miss Parker. The rest of your party has not arrived. Would you prefer to wait at the bar?" I nodded, grateful for a moment to compose myself before the annual performance began. The bartender mixed me a perfect Manhattan while I mentally rehearsed my responses to inevitable questions about my career, apartment, relationship status, and future plans. 20 minutes later. They arrived en masse. A Parker family entrance was never subtle. Dad led the charge in his tailored Brooks Brothers suit, Mom elegant in Carolina Herrera. Rebecca somehow looking fresh off a magazine cover despite coming straight from work, Michael in what I recognized as custom Italian suiting, and trailing behind them, Aunt Judith and Uncle William. Plus Cousin Thomas and his new wife Elise. The maitre d' escorted us to our table, the best in the house, naturally. Dad had made sure of that with a phone call to his good friend, the owner. I wasn't surprised to find myself seated at the far end, beside Aunt Judith, positioned almost like an afterthought. "Allison, darling, you look healthy," Aunt Judith said, her tone suggesting this wasn't entirely a compliment. "Have you done something different with your hair?" "Just the usual cut," I replied, touching my shoulder-length brown hair that was admittedly more practical than fashionable. The initial conversation flowed like a carefully choreographed dance. Weather observations, traffic complaints, comments about the restaurant's decor, all the safe topics that preceded the inevitable status reports. Michael cleared his throat after the first round of drinks arrived. "I might as well share my news," he said, grinning. "Mass General has asked me to head up the new neurosurgical research department. Comes with a substantial budget and 3 dedicated research assistants." Predictable exclamations of delight followed. Dad clapped him on the shoulder. Mom clasped her hands together in that particular way that signaled extreme pride, and Rebecca raised her glass in a toast. "To Michael," she said, continuing the Parker tradition of excellence. Not to be outdone, Rebecca waited for the applause to die down before casually mentioning her own achievement. "Goldman has put me in charge of our new sustainable investment division. We'll be managing a $5 billion portfolio focused on renewable energy." More congratulations circulated while I sipped my drink and prepared for what was coming next. "And what about you, Allison?" Uncle William pivoted toward me, his tone carrying that particular inflection that suggested he was asking out of obligation rather than interest. "Still pushing papers at. What agency was it again?" "It's a division within the Department of Justice," I answered truthfully, if incompletely. "Must be fascinating," he replied with the enthusiasm of someone discussing carpet samples. "What exactly do you do there all day?" Before I could formulate a suitably vague response, Dad interjected. "Allison handles administrative matters. Very important work, keeping things organized behind the scenes." I suppressed a smile. thinking about the interagency task force I was currently leading, with 46 agents across 3 countries coordinating through me. "How's the apartment, dear?" Mom asked, clearly trying to change the subject. "Still in that studio in Rebecca paused dramatically. "Murray Hill, isn't it? I keep telling her she could get so much more space if she'd just look in New Jersey." "I like my neighborhood," I said simply. What I didn't mention was that my studio was actually a spacious 1-bedroom in a doorman building that I owned outright, thanks to performance bonuses and careful investing. "You know, my firm is always looking for bright people in our administrative department," Rebecca added. "The starting salary would probably be twice what you're making now." Aunt Judith patted my hand sympathetically. "Not everyone needs a high-powered career to be happy, dear. There's nothing wrong with simplicity." The first course arrived, momentarily pausing the subtle dissection of my life choices. As I savored the exquisite tuna carpaccio, I noticed a young man in a trainee's uniform watching our table with curious interest. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't immediately place him in the dim restaurant lighting. "Allison, are you seeing anyone these days?" Mom asked when conversation inevitably turned back to me. "Not currently," I answered. My last relationship had ended 6 months ago when my partner couldn't handle the unpredictable hours and confidential nature of my work. Dating as an FBI agent wasn't impossible, but it required a level of understanding and flexibility that was surprisingly rare. "Well, Michael's friend James is newly divorced," Mom suggested hopefully. "He's a cardiothoracic surgeon with the most lovely summer home in the Hamptons." Cousin Thomas chimed in with his contribution to my apparent rehabilitation project. "Have you thought about going back to school? An MBA might open some doors for you." I smiled politely while calculating in my head how many years it had been since I'd led the cybersecurity briefing at his investment firm, a fact he was completely unaware of since I'd used my professional credentials rather than my family connection to secure the speaking engagement. The conversation mercifully shifted to other topics as the main courses arrived. I gradually relaxed, allowing myself to enjoy the perfectly prepared sea base while the spotlight moved away from my perceived shortcomings. Then I noticed the trainee again, this time staring directly at me with widening eyes of recognition. In that moment, memory clicked into place. Jake Miller, the 22-year-old tech prodigy who had helped us trace the cryptocurrency transactions in the Ruse coin case. I had spent hours preparing him for his testimony, which had ultimately helped secure convictions against 3 of the organization's leaders. As Jake began moving toward our table with purpose in his step, I felt my carefully constructed worlds beginning to collide. The sommelier had just finished describing the wine selection when Rebecca leaned forward, examining the menu with a little smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "The Dover sole looks divine," she said, then glanced at me with faux concern. "It's $120. Though, can you even afford this place, Allison?" I kept my expression neutral despite the familiar twist of irritation. "I'll manage." Dad cleared his throat. "No need for that, princess. I'll cover Allison's portion, of course." He said it with such casual condescension, as though covering a 30-something professional's dinner was the most natural thing in the world. Mom's eyes flickered with discomfort, but she remained silent, rearranging her silverware slightly. Her passive acceptance of these dynamics had long ago stopped surprising me. "Very generous." Uncle Richard, Cousin Thomas chimed in with a chuckle. "Government salaries being what they are. What is it they pay you these days, Allison?" "Enough for ramen and Netflix." I smiled tightly. "The compensation is adequate." "Adequate," Rebecca repeated, swirling her wine. "That sounds positively thrilling." "Meanwhile, I just got a summer bonus that's probably more than your annual salary." I took a slow sip of water, noticing the trainee Jake hovering nearby, clearly trying to catch my eye. I subtly shook my head, hoping he'd understand my signal to stay away. The last thing I needed was for him to approach and potentially compromise operational security. "Uncle William." never one to miss an opportunity for political commentary, launched into his familiar tirade. Government employees living off the taxpayer dollar while accomplishing nothing. No offense, Allison. But the bureaucratic bloat is what's destroying this country. Some government functions are essential, I replied mildly, thinking of the child trafficking ring my department had dismantled last year, reuniting 18 children with their families. Like what? Uncle William scoffed, shuffling papers from one desk to another. Michael, surprisingly, came to my partial defense. Come on, Uncle Will. Not all government work is useless. Law enforcement, for instance. Speaking of enforcement, Rebecca interrupted, I saw your car when you pulled up, Allison. That Honda is at least 10 years old. Don't tell me you're still driving that thing? The Honda was my personal vehicle. My bureau-issued Dodge Charger was safely parked in the FBI garage downtown. It gets me where I need to go, I replied. I could help you finance something more appropriate, Dad offered, his tone suggesting my car was personally embarrassing him. A woman your age should project success. I resisted, pointing out that my vehicle choice was partially about maintaining a low profile, a professional necessity, rather than a financial limitation. How's the dating scene in government work? Aunt Judith pivoted with her usual lack of subtlety. Any promising candidates, or are all the men there just as she paused? Searching for a diplomatic term, unambitious. I thought briefly of Agent Carson, who had recently taken a bullet while protecting a witness in one of my cases. Unambitious wasn't exactly the word I'd use to describe my colleagues. No one's special at the moment, I answered. That's the problem with waiting too long, Aunt Judith continued. All the good ones get taken. You know, at your age, I was already married with a child on the way. Mom jumped in, clearly trying to rescue me. Allison has plenty of time. Women have careers first these days. Career might be a strong word, Rebecca muttered, just loud enough to be heard. I felt my jaw tighten but maintained my composure. 8 years of undercover work had given me an excellent poker face. Looking around the table, I suddenly noticed Jake again. This time conferring with an older staff member and gesturing subtly in my direction. With a jolt, I recognized the older man as Marco Vitelli, Lou Bernardine's security director. 3 months ago, I had briefed the restaurant's security team about potential threats after we'd uncovered a terrorist plot targeting high-profile Manhattan restaurants. Marco had been especially attentive during my presentation. My attention snapped back to the table when Dad asked, "Have you at least started contributing to a retirement account? At your salary level, you need to begin as early as possible." Before I could answer, Rebecca jumped in. I doubt there's much left to contribute after rent in this city. Which reminds me, Allison. I know several excellent headhunters who could help you find something more substantial. The position of my executive assistant just opened up. The suggestion that I might work for my sister while managing a department of 32 agents with an annual budget of $12 million almost made me laugh out loud. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully, but I'm content where I am. Content, Dad repeated with a slight grimace, as though the word tasted bad. Parkers aren't raised to be content, Allison. We're raised to excel. I noticed Jake approaching our table with determination now, a coffee carafe in hand, despite the fact that none of us had ordered coffee yet. Marco was watching from a distance, a knowing look on his face. I have my own definition of excellence, I said quietly, just as Jake reached our table. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Jake approached our table with the confidence of someone who definitely wasn't just a trainee carrying coffee. His eyes locked with mine, lighting up with unmistakable recognition. "Agent Parker," he exclaimed, much too loudly for my comfort. "Welcome back to Le Bernardine. Your usual coffee? Black with 1 sugar, right?" Time seemed to slow down as I watched the transformation sweep across my family's faces. Dad, who had been mid-sip, choked on his water. triggering a coughing fit that turned his complexion an alarming shade of crimson. Rebecca's wine glass froze halfway to her lips, her perfectly manicured hand suddenly trembling enough to send ripples across the burgundy liquid. Mom's eyebrows shot up so dramatically they nearly disappeared into her hairline, her composed socialite mask cracking for perhaps the first time in decades. Michael's fork clattered against his plate with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over our corner of the restaurant. Aunt Judith's mouth formed a perfect O, while Uncle William's face progressed rapidly from confusion to disbelief to something approaching respect. Cousin Thomas blinked repeatedly as if trying to reboot his brain, while his wife Elise, who had barely spoken all evening, suddenly looked at me with new interest. Thank you, I managed, professional training kicking in despite my internal panic. Coffee would be great. Jake, completely oblivious to the bomb he had just detonated, continued cheerfully. The whole team still talks about how you tracked down that Rusecoin ringleader through the encrypted messaging app. Absolutely brilliant work. Dad's coughing intensified. Mom mechanically patted his back while keeping her wide eyes fixed on me. Is the international operation complete now? Jake asked, pouring coffee with the casual air of someone discussing the weather rather than classified FBI operations in front of my stunned family. Last I heard, you were coordinating with Interpol on the Swiss accounts. Perhaps we could discuss this another time, I suggested firmly, using what my colleagues called my command voice. Oh! Jake's face fell as realization dawned. Oh God. I'm so sorry, Agent Parker. I didn't mean to. I should have realized this was personal, not. He gestured vaguely with the coffee pot, mortification replacing his earlier enthusiasm. It's fine, I assured him, though it very much wasn't. Thank you for the coffee. Jake nodded frantically and backed away from the table, nearly colliding with another server in his haste to escape. The silence at our table stretched to an unbearable length. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to bewilderment to dawning comprehension. Rebecca finally broke the silence. Agent Parker? Her voice had climbed nearly an octave. FBI, I confirmed, seeing no point in denying it now. Cybercrime Division, Special Agent, 8 years. Dad, having finally regained his ability to breathe, sputtered, but you said. I said I worked in a division of the Department of Justice, I replied calmly. Which is true. But we thought. I know what you thought, I said. I never corrected you. Uncle William leaned forward, suddenly animated. You're an actual federal agent? With a gun and everything? I nodded. And a badge. Yes. Cyber crime. Michael repeated slowly, as if testing out a foreign phrase. Like computer hackers? Among other things. My department specializes in cryptocurrency fraud, dark web operations, and related financial crimes. Rebecca's face had transitioned from shock to suspicion. This is some kind of joke, right? You put that waiter up to this. His name is Jake Miller. He was a key witness in a case I wrapped up last month. $300 million in retirement funds stolen through a sophisticated cryptocurrency scheme. Jake helped us trace the transactions. Mom found her voice at last. But all these years, why didn't you tell us? Before I could answer, Marco Vitelli approached our table. Unlike Jake, Marco carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations, unsurprising, given his background as former Italian special forces before moving into private security. Agent Parker, he greeted me with a respectful nod. I apologize for the trainee's indiscretion. Jake is still learning proper protocol. It's fine, Marco, I assured him. How's the new security system working out? Excellent, thanks to your team's recommendations. The facial recognition integration has already flagged 2 persons of interest. Dad was staring at Marco, then at me, then back at Marco, his expression suggesting he was witnessing pigs fly. Would you prefer a more private table? Marco offered, glancing meaningfully at my family. We have a security section in the back. That won't be necessary, but thank you. Marco nodded. Of course. Your meal tonight is complimentary. Agent Parker. It's the least we can do after your team's assistance with our security protocols. That's not necessary, I began. I insist, Marco said firmly. Chef Eric specifically asked me to convey his gratitude. You prevented what could have been a terrible incident. With another respectful nod, he withdrew, leaving me to face my family's collective amazement. What exactly did you prevent? Michael asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Before I could formulate an appropriately vague response, my phone buzzed with a specific pattern, the emergency signal from my team. I glanced at the screen and saw the alert code that indicated an imminent operation. Excuse me, I said, standing up. I need to take this. I stepped away from the table but remained within view, aware that 8 pairs of eyes were watching my every move. Parker, I answered, keeping my voice low but knowing my family was straining to hear. We have movement on the Vanguard server, Agent Rodriguez reported. The data transfer has begun. Do we intercept now or wait for the secondary authentication? Secure the primary access first, then hold for my signal on the secondary, I instructed. I'll be online in 20 minutes. Have Chen standing by for the decryption sequence. Copy that. 15 devices currently accessing the drop site. Document everything. Full protocol. I ended the call and returned to the table, where my family sat in various states of astonishment. The dynamic had shifted so dramatically I could almost feel the change in atmospheric pressure. I apologize, I said, taking my seat. Work matter. Was that? Rebecca began, then stopped, apparently unable to formulate her question. An active FBI operation? Yes. I took a sip of the coffee Jake had brought. Perfect, as he'd said, black with 1 sugar. This entire time, Dad said slowly, when we thought you were some kind of clerk. You were an FBI agent, Mom finished, wonder and confusion mingling in her voice. I looked around at their faces, the family who had dismissed me, underestimated me, pitted me, and felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a strange sort of grief for all the authentic connections we might have had if they'd ever bothered to see me clearly. Yes, I said simply. I am. I don't believe it, Rebecca said, her voice hovering between accusation and astonishment. Show us your badge. I hesitated, then reached into my purse and discreetly removed my credentials, keeping them below table level to avoid drawing attention from other diners. I passed them to Rebecca, whose perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she examined the gold shield and ID card. FBI Special Agent Allison Parker, she read aloud, as if the words might make more sense when spoken. Cybercrime Division. Dad practically snatched the credentials from her hand. Let me see that. He scrutinized every detail, from the holographic security features to the authorization codes, turning it over repeatedly as if expecting to find fake stamped on the back. This looks real, he finally admitted, reluctantly passing it to Michael. It is real, I confirmed, accepting my badge back after it had made its way around the table. I was recruited directly from college. That's why I chose State University. Actually, they have one of the best computer forensics programs in the country and several FBI liaisons on faculty. But you never said anything, Mom said, hurt evident in her voice. All these years. There were reasons for that, I replied carefully. Operational security is one. Operational security, Uncle William repeated. The same man who had been denouncing government employees just minutes earlier. My God, Allison, you're actually fighting crime. That's accurate if somewhat simplified. The Ruse coin case, Michael said thoughtfully. I read about that in the Wall Street Journal. $300 million stolen from retirement accounts. That was you. Me and my team. I clarified. We have excellent analysts and field agents. Your team. Dad's eyebrows nearly reached his hairline. You lead a team? I'm the special agent in charge for cryptocurrency fraud operations, I explained. I oversee 32 agents across 3 offices. Rebecca's wine glass landed on the table with more force than necessary. You're a department head? At the FBI? I nodded. With actual authority? People report to you. Yes, Rebecca. People report to me. She fell back against her chair, momentarily speechless, a rare state for my articulate sister. Jake reappeared at the table, this time accompanied by an older man in chef's whites whom I recognized as the executive sous chef. Agent Parker, the chef said warmly. Chef Eric sends his personal regards. We've prepared a special dessert selection for your table. That's very kind, but unnecessary, I began. We insist, he said. Your work with our security team was invaluable. This city is safer because of agents like you. I thanked him graciously, acutely aware of my family's stunned expressions as the chef and Jake retreated. What exactly did you do for this restaurant? Aunt Judith asked, leaning forward with newfound interest. 3 months ago, we uncovered a potential threat targeting high-profile Manhattan restaurants. I briefed their security team on recognition protocols and enhanced measures. A terrorist threat? Uncle William pressed. I can't discuss specifics, I said apologetically. Of course not, he nodded with unexpected understanding. National security. The phrase hung in the air, transforming the atmosphere. My family was looking at me as if seeing me for the first time, which, in many ways, they were. So, when you said you had to work late, Mom began. I might have been conducting surveillance, coordinating with international agencies, or preparing court briefings, I finished. Not filing paperwork. And your apartment? Rebecca asked. Is that some kind of cover? I smiled slightly. No, that's actually my apartment. I own it outright. FBI salaries aren't as low as you might think, especially with field certification bonuses and language proficiency supplements. Languages. Dad's head snapped up. What languages do you speak? Russian, Mandarin, and enough Arabic to get by, I answered. International cybercrime doesn't confine itself to English speakers. Michael was shaking his head in amazement. I can't believe we never knew. 8 years, Allison. To be fair, I never explicitly lied, I pointed out. I just allowed you to make assumptions. But why? Mom asked, genuine hurt in her eyes. Didn't you trust us? My phone buzzed again before I could answer. A quick glance showed another alert from my team. I'm sorry, I need to take this, I said, standing again. I moved a few steps away, aware that my family was making minimal effort to pretend they weren't listening. Parker, I answered. We've isolated the primary access point, Agent Rodriguez reported. Singapore server is live. Secondary authentication expected in 7 minutes. Prepare for simultaneous execution on my command. I want total containment, full documentation protocol. Understood. How soon can you be online? I glanced back at the table, at the unfinished meals and the conversation we'd barely begun. 20 minutes. Have Davidson prepare the intercept packages. I ended the call and returned to the table once more. You really are. Dad trailed off, seemingly unable to find words. A federal agent in the middle of an operation, I confirmed. I apologize, but I'll need to cut dinner short. We're tracking a major data breach in real time. Of course. Uncle William said immediately, with newfound respect. National security comes first. Is it dangerous? Mom asked, concern replacing her earlier confusion. This particular operation is digital, not physical, I assured her. Though that's not always the case. Have you ever? Michael hesitated, been in danger? I thought about the Zagreb operation last year, where our team had extracted a whistleblower under gunfire. The scar on my left shoulder twinged slightly at the memory. The job has its moments, I said diplomatically. All this time, Rebecca said, more to herself than to me, we thought you were just a nobody. The word hung in the air between us. Years of dismissive comments and condescending assumptions distilled into a single syllable. "I know what you thought," I said quietly. That was occasionally useful, professionally speaking. Underestimation can be a tactical advantage. The dessert selection arrived, an elaborate array of the restaurant's finest offerings. I regretfully explained that I needed to leave. "But we have so many questions," Mom protested. "Another time," I promised, gathering my things. "I'll call tomorrow." As I stood to leave, Dad rose as well. Something he had rarely done for me before. "Allison," he said, his voice gruff with some emotion I couldn't quite identify. We. "It's okay, Dad," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "We'll talk soon." As I walked out of Lou Bernardine, nodding farewell to Marco at the door, I felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of their misconceptions had been physically pressing on me all these years. My bureau-issued phone buzzed again. The operation was waiting. Agent Parker was needed. Behind me, I left a table of wide-eyed relatives, finally seeing me clearly for the first time. The following Saturday, I found myself back at my parents' Connecticut home for an impromptu family discussion. The formal invitation, delivered via my mother's elegant stationery rather than her usual text messages, suggested the gravity with which they were treating our new reality. I parked my Honda in the circular driveway, wedging it between Rebecca's Mercedes and Michael's Tesla. The contrast wasn't lost on me, though it suddenly seemed less important than it once had. Mom answered the door before I could ring the bell, enveloping me in a hug that felt different from her usual reserved embraces. "Allison," she said, holding me at arm's length to examine me as if searching for previously unnoticed signs of my actual career. "Come in, everyone's waiting." The family was assembled in the living room like a board meeting about to commence. Dad occupied his usual leather armchair, Rebecca and Michael shared the sofa, and 2 additional chairs had been positioned to complete the circle. The setup felt oddly formal, almost like an intervention, which, in a way, I supposed it was. "Allison," Dad said, standing as I entered. This new habit of rising when I entered a room was still jarring. "Thank you for coming." I took one of the empty chairs, setting my purse beside me. "Of course." An awkward silence descended. They were all staring at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion to, in Rebecca's case, something approaching defensiveness. "Well," Dad finally said, clearing his throat, "I think we all have questions." "That's understandable," I replied evenly. 8 years, Allison," Mom said, her voice carrying a hint of accusation beneath the hurt. 8 years of believing you were struggling in some entry-level position. Why wouldn't you tell us the truth? I considered my answer carefully. Initially, it was about operational security. New agents are encouraged to be discreet about their positions. For 8 years, Rebecca challenged. "No," I admitted. After the first year or 2, it became something else. "What?" Michael asked. I took a deep breath. "It became easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to correct misconceptions that seemed deeply entrenched." Dad's brow furrowed. "What misconceptions?" That I was underachieving. That I had settled for less. That I needed guidance, intervention, or rescue. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "We were trying to help." "Were you?" I asked, meeting her gaze directly. "Or were you reaffirming a family narrative where I was the disappointment? The one who couldn't quite measure up to Parker standards?" The silence that followed confirmed I had struck a nerve. "Do you remember my college graduation, Dad?" I continued. "You spent the entire ceremony on your phone, then asked if this state school thing had been worth it. You never once asked why I chose that program specifically." Dad had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't realize." "And Rebecca," I turned to my sister. "Last Christmas, you offered to connect me with your company's HR department for an entry-level position, saying, and I quote, 'even you could handle it.'" Rebecca flushed. "I was trying to help you advance." No, you were confirming your own superiority, I countered. The dynamic was comfortable for everyone. Golden child, brilliant son, and struggling middle daughter who needed pity and occasional rescue attempts. That's not fair, Michael protested weakly. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked about my work with genuine interest? Not with condescension or pity, but with actual curiosity about what I might be contributing to the world? They exchanged uncomfortable glances, unable to recall such an instance. Meanwhile, I continued, I was building a career I'm proud of. I've received the FBI Director's Award for Excellence in Investigation. I've helped recover over $800 million in stolen funds. I've worked with international agencies to bring down criminal enterprises across 4 continents. I've testified before Senate committees and trained other agencies in cybercrime detection. Mom's eyes had widened progressively throughout my recitation. Allison, we had no idea. You never asked, I said simply. You assumed. Dad leaned forward, his expression more serious than I'd seen in years. What's your actual salary, if you don't mind my asking? Of course, that would be his first detailed question. Base salary for my position grade is $138,000, plus locality adjustment for New York, language proficiency bonuses, and performance incentives. Rebecca nearly choked. You make more than some of our junior executives. I'm not a junior anything, Rebecca. I run a specialized division with significant responsibilities. Why the Honda then? Dad asked, still fixated on appearances. And that apartment in Murray Hill? The Honda is practical, unobtrusive, and paid for. My apartment is actually in Gramercy Park, not Murray Hill. And I own it outright. I choose not to broadcast my financial situation or professional status. In my line of work, maintaining a low profile can be advantageous. Have you really been in dangerous situations? Mom asked, returning to Michael's unanswered question from the restaurant. I hesitated, then decided they deserved some truth. I unbuttoned the top of my blouse just enough to reveal the edge of the scar on my left shoulder. Zagreb, last year. Extraction operation went sideways. Bullet missed the artery by less than an inch. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad went pale. I was in the hospital when you called to remind me about bringing wine to Thanksgiving dinner. I said to Mom, I took the call between doses of morphine and told you I had a cold. Oh my God, she whispered. This is who I am, I said, toning my blouse. I'm good at my job. I'm respected in my field. I make a difference. And none of you ever bothered to see it because it didn't fit your narrative. The silence that followed was heavy with revelation and regret. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I always knew you had potential, Allison. The statement, so perfectly capturing his inability to acknowledge his misconceptions, nearly made me laugh despite the tension. No, Dad, you didn't. You decided I was underachieving and never questioned that assessment. You never looked beyond your own expectations to see what I was actually accomplishing. That's not entirely fair. He protested weakly. Isn't it? When have you ever been proud of me, specifically? Not as a generic Parker, but as Allison. His struggle to produce an example was answer enough. Rebecca, surprisingly, was the first to show genuine contrition. I've been awful to you, she said quietly. Condescending, dismissive. Yes, I agreed, not unkindly. You have been. I think. Michael interjected, we've all been operating on assumptions that were clearly incorrect. The question is, I said, looking around at them, where do we go from here? Dad straightened in his chair. We start over. Clean slate. I don't want a clean slate, I corrected him. I want acknowledgement of the past and a commitment to something different moving forward. I want authentic relationships based on who we actually are, not who you think I should be. That seems reasonable, Mom said, reaching for my hand. More than reasonable, given how we've treated you. I have one question, Rebecca said. Her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. Were you ever going to tell us? If that waiter hadn't recognized you, Would we ever have known the truth? It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself repeatedly since the dinner. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'd like to think eventually I would have. But the longer a deception continues, the harder it becomes to correct. Even a deception by omission, Michael noted. Yes, I acknowledged. I'm not claiming moral high ground here. I allowed misperceptions to persist because they were occasionally useful and because confronting them seemed exhausting. And now? Dad asked. Now we have an opportunity to start again with clear eyes, I said. I'm still the same person I was before. You just have more accurate information about what that means. The conversation continued for hours, unpacking years of misunderstandings and establishing tentative new boundaries. There were difficult moments, old patterns that threatened to reassert themselves, but also glimpses of something healthier emerging from the rubble of our former dynamic. As the afternoon waned, Rebecca asked if she could speak with me privately. We walked out to the garden, sitting on the stone bench beside Mom's prize roses. I need to tell you something, she said once we were alone. Something I've never told anyone in the family. I waited, curious. I'm miserable at Goldman, she confessed, the words rushing out as if she'd been holding them back for years. The pressure is crushing. The politics are toxic. I cry in the bathroom at least twice a week. The admission stunned me. But you always seem so triumphant about it. Because that's what's expected, she said bitterly. Parker excellence, remember? I can't let anyone see I'm drowning. Rebecca, when that waiter called you Agent Parker, do you know what I felt after the shock wore off? Jealousy. She laughed humorlessly. Not because of the title or the danger or whatever, but because you built a life that actually means something. You help people. You make a difference. Meanwhile, I help billionaires become slightly richer billionaires and call it success. I was seeing my sister clearly, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives, not as the golden child, but as someone trapped in a cage partially of her own making. It's not too late to make changes, I suggested gently. Isn't it? I've spent 15 years climbing this particular ladder. What else would I even do? That's a question worth exploring, I said. And for what it's worth, you'd make a terrifying prosecutor if you ever wanted to put that Harvard Law degree to different use. She smiled faintly. You think? I know ruthlessness when I see it, I replied, returning her smile. It can be an asset in the right context. As we walked back toward the house, I felt the first genuine connection with my sister that I could remember in years, perhaps ever. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. The family dynamic had been fundamentally altered. The carefully constructed hierarchy had crumbled. What would rise in its place remained to be seen, but for the first time, I felt hopeful that it might be something authentic. 3 months after the revelation at Lou Bernardine, I found myself hosting Sunday dinner at my Gramercy Park apartment, something that would have been unimaginable before. My family's perception of me had shifted so dramatically that even my living space was viewed through a new lens. The same apartment they had previously dismissed as a starter studio was now appreciated for its pre-war details, doorman security, and proximity to the private park for which I had a coveted key. This crown molding is original, isn't it? Mom asked, admiring features that had always been there but somehow invisible during her previous visits. 1928, I confirmed, arranging a platter of appetizers. The whole building was renovated about 15 years ago, but they preserved all the architectural details. Dad wandered over to the bookshelf where my awards were displayed, no longer hidden away in the bedroom closet. He picked up the glass plaque bearing the FBI Director's Award for Excellence. This is really something, Allison, he said, examining it with genuine interest. What exactly was this operation that warranted such recognition? The Black Shield case, I explained. A ransomware attack that targeted hospital systems across the Northeast. We managed to recover the decryption keys without paying the ransom and identified the entire network behind it. I remember reading about that, Michael chimed in. Wasn't there a concern about patient data being compromised? That was their leverage, I nodded. We recovered all of it before any personal information could be sold. The conversation flowed naturally into the various aspects of my work that I could discuss, with questions that reflected actual curiosity rather than obligatory politeness. The change was still somewhat disorienting, like stepping into an alternate universe where my family had always valued my contributions. Rebecca arrived last, having texted earlier that she was coming from a meeting with a nonprofit legal center. Following our garden conversation, she had begun exploring options outside of investment banking, starting with pro bono work during her weekends. The changes in her were subtle but noticeable, a softening around the eyes, slightly less rigid posture, more genuine smiles. "Sorry I'm late," she said, handing me a bottle of wine. "The asylum cases are taking longer than expected." "No problem," I assured her. "We're just getting started." As we settled around my dining table, a genuine antique I'd purchased with my last performance bonus, I couldn't help but reflect on the transformation of our family dynamic over such a short period. Dad, who had spent years barely listening when I spoke, now asked detailed questions about my cases. Mom had stopped suggesting eligible doctors and lawyers, instead expressing concern about my safety in genuine rather than performative ways. Michael had consulted me about upgrading his hospital's cybersecurity protocols, acknowledging my expertise in an area where he was merely competent. Even Uncle William had undergone a remarkable conversion from government critic to proud extended family member, apparently telling everyone at his country club about his niece, the FBI agent, with only minor exaggerations of my role. The most profound change, however, was with Rebecca. Our newfound honesty had opened a channel between us that I hadn't realized was possible. We'd begun meeting for coffee weekly, gradually replacing decades of competition with something approaching genuine sisterhood. "I have some news," she announced as we finished the main course. "I've given notice at Goldman." Mom nearly dropped her wine glass. "What?" "I've accepted a position with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office," Rebecca continued, a nervous smile playing at her lips. "Starting next month, I'll be prosecuting financial crimes." "But your career, all those years," Dad began, his old reflexes briefly resurfacing, "were valuable experience that makes me uniquely qualified to understand complex financial fraud," Rebecca finished firmly. "I'll be taking a significant pay cut, but the work will actually matter." The pride I felt for her courage was unexpected and genuine. "That's wonderful, Rebecca." "I have my little sister to thank," she said, raising her glass in my direction. "Seeing you actually make a difference, it forced me to reconsider what success really means." The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on everything from Michael's research to Mom's recently revived interest in landscape photography, a passion she had abandoned decades ago in favor of more society-appropriate pursuits. As they prepared to leave, Dad pulled me aside, his expression uncharacteristically humble. "I need to say something that's long overdue," he began awkwardly. "I was wrong about you, Allison. Not just about your career, but about who you are. I miss seeing your strength, your integrity, your intelligence, not because they weren't there, but because I wasn't looking properly." The acknowledgement, so long desired but never expected, caught me off guard. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Not because you turned out to be more successful than we thought in conventional terms, but because you had the courage to define success on your own terms, even when we made that unnecessarily difficult." After they left, I stood in my quiet apartment, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The revelation at Lou Bernardine had been dramatic, certainly, but the real transformation had come in the difficult conversations that followed, the willingness to acknowledge past hurts, to question entrenched patterns, to see each other with clearer eyes. For years, I had allowed my family's underestimation to define our relationship, using their misconceptions as both shield and excuse. While their assumptions had been unfair, my silent acceptance of those assumptions had contributed to the dysfunction. True change had required courage on both sides, their courage to admit they had been wrong, and my courage to finally be fully seen. I realized that the lesson extended far beyond family dynamics. How often do we allow ourselves to be defined by others' perceptions? How frequently do we choose the comfort of low expectations over the vulnerability of being truly known? How many authentic connections do we sacrifice at the altar of appearances and assumptions? The most profound freedom comes not from hiding who we are, but from having the courage to be seen, completely, honestly, without pretense or performance. The relationships worth having are those that can withstand that level of authenticity. As I stood there in my apartment, no longer a secret agent in my own family, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The path forward wouldn't be perfect. Old habits would resurface. Old wounds would occasionally reopen. But we had taken the first steps towards something genuine, and that was worth celebrating. In the end, the greatest revelation wasn't that I was an FBI agent rather than an administrative assistant. It was the discovery that authentic connection requires both the courage to be seen and the willingness to truly see others, a lesson that had changed not just my family's perception of me, but my understanding of myself. Have you ever felt underestimated by those closest to you? Or perhaps you've realized you've been underestimating someone important in your life. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to be seen or to see others more clearly. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. And share with someone who might need this reminder that being underestimated can sometimes be your greatest strength until the day you choose to reveal who you truly are. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, the most powerful revelation is the one that transforms not just how others see you, but how you see yourself.